Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AWS Nordics Office Hours with me, Gunnar Grosch, your friendly neighborhood developer advocate based here in Sweden. And this is my weekly show where I bring on AWS experts to talk about specific AWS-related topics and let you, our viewers, ask any questions you might have. And hopefully by the end of this hour, we've all learned something new. And like I said, I bring on AWS experts, and this week, well, I'm super happy to be joined by my teammate, Faz. Welcome to the show, Faz.
Hey, Gunnar. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
This is your second time, right, on the show?
Yep. Second time, and glad to be back. Glad to be invited back.
Well, I think that's a good sign that you're invited back. It means that we had fun the last time. So tell people a bit about yourself.
Yeah. So for folks who were tuning in for the first time and seeing me on the Nordics Office Hours, I'm Faz. I'm a senior developer advocate covering the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey region. I'm based out of sunny, dusty, deserty Dubai, at the other end of the Middle East, and have been in the developer team for over a year. So, like Gunnar, I work on developer outreach to builders across the region by giving talks, doing workshops, and also coming on office hours and giving demos.
Exactly. And well, I would be happy to have sun and dust, I guess, right now. Here in Sweden, we have a few degrees just above zero, and it is raining at the moment. So no sun in sight. Well, all right. So that's not where we're going to spend the hour on talking about the weather. But this week, we are going to talk about serverless development and how to create and visualize your serverless workloads on AWS. And as usual, we want this show to be highly interactive. So if you're tuning in, well, drop a note in the chat. Let us know where you are from and maybe tell us about the weather where you are right now. But then throughout the show, please ask any questions, post any comments you might have about what we're talking about. And then Faz, as the expert on the show, is going to do his best to answer your questions. But then, Faz, talking about serverless development, what do you see, or how do you see developers developing serverless workloads today?
Yeah, so Gunnar, it's an interesting question because serverless has grown over the years in terms of adoption. I mean, one of the key releases we did in 2014 was announcing AWS Lambda to the world, where over the last 9 years, it's just evolved, and the amount of offerings that you get on serverless compute in general with Lambda, the idea where you can take a function and then afterwards just provide it on AWS, select a runtime, select some memory and CPU, and you're off to the races. Over the years, there has been a slew of releases in terms of other services that allow you to just manage your code side of things. You do a bit of the architecture and then you integrate or interface some of these resources together without you managing anything under the hood, right? None of the infrastructure is managed by you. You just need to provide what is required through other forms of infrastructure as code, for example, or maybe by using the AWS SDK directly. So one of the things I just wanted to show you, so we could just pull up the screen, is how today, if someone is just getting started with serverless and then they go onto Google and then they search for getting started with serverless applications, you go on to the AWS webpage and you're kind of shown all these different options, right? From a developer tools perspective, where you can see you can get started with multiple frameworks. Predominantly what we see is that in the infrastructure as code space, we have at the base in AWS, you have something known as CloudFormation that allows you to write templates in JSON or in YAML, preferably YAML, of course, where you can actually describe or imperatively describe what your infrastructure should look like, and then afterwards it gets provisioned in AWS. Now, over the years, because serverless adoption has grown, we released an open source framework called SAM, which is Serverless Application Model. And this allows you to build serverless applications by providing shorthand syntax. And we'll be showing a bit of that in the demos today, where you can express things like Lambda functions, API gateway endpoints, DynamoDB databases, and even event source mapping, where you kind of create event-driven architecture behind the scenes. So you can describe all of that with SAM. But because of customers also bringing back feedback and saying, okay, this is how we actually develop and build serverless better, we released another open source development framework called CDK, which is Cloud Development Kit, that actually allows builders who are proficient with code, right, whether you're Java developer or a TypeScript developer, or even in Python, you can code your infrastructure. So literally, infrastructure as code becomes infrastructure is code. This whole idea where you can use your existing knowledge of IDs and the tooling behind the scenes and even the language constructs, and then provision infrastructure using something like CDK. Beyond that, you also have third-party offerings, like you have the serverless framework. One of our partners with AWS, they provide a CLI, and also other things like Chalice and Claudia. But one of the things to realize in this is that a lot of this requires you to come upfront, read the documentation, and then get started, right? So you would maybe go to SAM, for example, and then you would have a look at that, and you may go to resources over here, and then start looking at the developer guide in this case, which then gives you all the details about the templates and the specification and how to build it and deploy it. This is kind of like where developers are right now in the space, and seeing this and seeing how customers have continuously provided us feedback, we just announced an awesome release at reInvent 2022, which allows you to visually design and build serverless applications. So I'll quickly switch into that because I can't contain my excitement for this. So this is a new release, which we call Application Composer. And it's a great time to actually do this session right now, because we just announced Application Composer going GA in most of the standard regions. This idea where you can visually design and build the applications by using a canvas. And then we'll be explaining a bit under the hood of what exactly happens.
Before we dive too deep into Application Composer, we have 53 minutes more to go where we can dive into it. I just want to ask the viewers as well what they're using for development today, no matter if it's for serverless development or anything else. If you're using SAM, if you're using serverless framework, CDK, and so on. So please let us know and help us understand where you stand today. So maybe we can refer a bit back to it as well when we're talking about Application Composer. All right, so Application Composer, as you mentioned, it is a more visual way to build your applications then.
Yeah, it is. And one of the things that we have done in AWS is we realize that a lot of customers, they come back to us asking about best practices, right? They come in and say, okay, fine, if I want to get started with serverless, I want to create a Lambda function and then maybe have an S3 bucket that triggers a Lambda function every time I upload a file, and maybe some other kind of standard implementations. I want to see what's the best way to do it, because when you go into a SAM template, for example, if I just pull up something from here, maybe I can give you a simple. Let me see if I can pull up sample applications.
Zoom in a couple of steps there to make it a bit.
Yeah, there are a couple of steps. And in the template, for example, let's say, for example, if you want to bring in an S3 bucket and a Lambda function, you also need to ensure that you have the right IAM policies in place. Because especially if it's a Lambda function that's trying to connect and read something from an S3 bucket, right? So accessibility becomes important. You need to remember a lot of these constructs. You need to remember a lot of the values behind the scenes when you're actually creating the templates. What Application Composer does is, when you visually actually create a project, a serverless project, it uses best practices under the hood and then creates that code for you, which we'll be seeing soon in a demo. So I'll quickly load into that, and I'll also talk through it when we show you what else Application Composer can actually manage for you. So let me just get started. And when you click on the Create Project button on the main page, you get an option of creating a new blank project or loading an existing one. And we'll come to the load existing one a little bit later. The idea is that if you have existing serverless applications that you've created using SAM, for example, and if it has a template file, a YAML file, for example, you could load that project in directly, and then afterwards start visually, going through it and then even editing it if needed. Now, in my case, I'm going to start with a blank project. And if you notice over here, what it does is it gives you an option of whether you want to have it connected to your local file system. This is kind of like where Application Composer allows you to use the files on your own system. It doesn't store anything online. It doesn't store anything in your account. And this allows you to then, operate and edit your files directly using your favorite ID, and your own tooling that is there. If you go with the unconnected option, what it does is that it still gives you the visual canvas. But if you want to manually create or edit the template later, you'll have to copy it down, right, yourself, and then edit it directly. In my case, I'll use connected. And just a note for folks who are trying this, just make sure that you use either Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge, because this uses a file system API in the browser that's only supported currently in these two browsers. So I would suggest just leverage either one of these browsers in this case. Next, I'm just going to create a location. I'll just select a folder. And what this is going to do is it's going to ask me where I can select which folder I can do this. And I have created a blank folder already. So I'll just select this. And this is going to ask you permission immediately, right? So from a security perspective, the idea is that just because you pointed to a folder, just the browser doesn't directly access it. You need to explicitly provide permissions. And in my case, I'm just going to say, yes, I want to view the files. And then I should also be given later an option where I can, change those files if needed. So this is basically where it'll ask to save changes. And in this case, here's the template, here's the canvas, and you are basically given a blank canvas. And I'll quickly, at a high level, just show you what's available. And we'll talk about the resources later, because currently Application Composer supports a certain set of serverless resources which you can pull in and then configure. But then there are, of course, it's always in the works, where the idea is that based on feedback from customers, based on which is the most popular resources being edited and deployed in serverless applications, you may see more coming in the near future. So from a canvas perspective, you have a list of nodes that you can pick, any resource that you can drop and put in this case. And what this does is that this will allow me to just create visually an application. So let's say, for example, I'll start with the most simplest and the first service that we released, which is S3. And I just have an S3 bucket in this case. In the details, you have some preliminary details that you can edit as part of this application architecture. And this has a logical ID, which you can then reference in a template, right? So within your CloudFormation template or your SAM template, you can actually refer this. I'll just keep it simple and standard. It's just called a bucket. You can also do things like activating static website hosting, and you'll even like blocking public access, which I'll keep as is, because I'm not going to be opening this S3 bucket to the public world. Right. So this S3 bucket is there, and I think it's pretty lonely right now. So let's do something much more awesome. The idea is, what I want to do is, and I'm going to show you later how I deploy all of this, where I'm going to create a simple app which is going to allow me to upload a file. So I'll do it from the command line, and I'm going to log it in the console, right, as a beginning part, right? Just log the entry into a console, and we can have a look at the logs later. So what I've done right now is I have dragged in a Lambda function, and I've also connected these two lines. Now this is basically what we call as nodes or ports. This is basically called a node, and this is called a port. And what you do with the port is you can interface it with other services. So you can connect and say, okay, fine, S3 bucket is connected to a function, or the function is triggered from an S3 bucket. And based on how Application Composer sees these components under the hood, it starts creating the code. So for that, to show you from an application perspective, this is the template that's being created in the canvas, and also on my local file system, which I'll jump into soon. In this case, what it's done is that it's created a bucket, and it's a template. In this case, it has also added the bucket policies that are required. In this case, the S3 bucket policy, and also I'm able to get the bucket on in this case. And also then, because I added the function, I am also able to connect and retrieve. I'm having an event that is configured on the Lambda function that triggers this Lambda function, right, from the bucket, and that basically is something I can read. And we'll see that in the log how it actually comes up, and all these other things also, right? So things like the function log group for the logs from the Lambda function, and everything else is just standard. What I'll do is I'm going to use Node.js 16 because of certain dependencies. And just to walk you through what you get actually in Lambda compared to what you get in an S3 bucket, you're actually getting a lot of other options in this case. So you can select the package types in a Lambda function, which is in this case from here you can select the zip file or a container image. You can also define the source path. I'll just keep it the same. You have the list of runtimes in this, which you can then select, and also the architecture, right? So you can actually select whether you want to go with ARM or with x86, and also define the handler in this case. Beyond that, of course, the standard Lambda configurations like the memory and the timeout also comes in. It has some default values which we provide. So I'll do a save, and also I will just quickly pull up my VS Code. Let me just do that. In the meantime, we'll see if there's also any other questions in this case.
There's a bunch of comments in the chat, but no questions at the moment.
No questions. Okay, cool. No worries.
No. You're talking about cup of noodles. I'm not sure exactly if that's referring to the bucket or if it's something else.
Cool. No worries. Let me just set everything in the terminal so that it's easier than to just type in.
I think Valid is asking you to go with ARM, the graviton-based.
Okay.
Yeah, sustainability,
Sure.
performance, and cost.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're actually running this in your console, you can definitely do that as part of this. Like you can go with ARM, especially with the Graviton processors being supported, but also make sure that you get Graviton in your region. Like to give you an example, in Dubai, we have a new region that we had launched like a few months ago, and we are still waiting for Graviton to come in, which should come soon, right? In that case, so I would suggest just do make sure that you get that option there as part of the Lambda function. So yeah, what I've done is I've opened the folder directly in this case, and I am having my files over here. The same template.yaml file that you actually saw in the browser is also shown over here.
You're not showing the ID right now, so
I'm not.
No.
Oh, okay. Let me just check this.
Well, we're still seeing Application Composer. So too many screens and too many different windows, Faz.
Yes, sorry about that. Right. I think. All right. Let me just stop this. Let me just present it again.
It's always something with live demos, so don't worry.
Yes.
All right. So if you just joined us, this is the AWS Nordics Office Hours. I'm joined by my teammate Faz today, and we're looking at how to create and visualize your serverless workloads. And let's see if we can actually visualize our IDE as well.
There you go. We have the IDE ready now.
There you go.
Nice. Yes. And thanks for pointing out, folks. Appreciate it in that case. So yeah, I mean, we created the template. In this case, I just dragged in some of the, I dragged in a bucket and a function for folks who are just joining in. And simultaneously in my local file system, it is creating the template file. And because I actually dragged in a Lambda function, it has also created an index.js file with the required package.json, which is pretty cool, right? In my case now, I have a ready SAM. I have a Lambda function that is ready that I can then deploy using something like SAM CLI, right? In this case. So what I'm going to do is, because this is a straightforward, function in this case, I'm going to first deploy this directly. And I'm just going to use a very simple approach where I will have right, so I'm just going to keep it simple. You can use SAM deploy as an option also in this case, but I'm going to use SAM sync because I just want to go with the standard options in this case, right? With whatever's given in the YAML. And SAM sync is a great way to also, keep a watch on what's happening. So you can actually add a flag called, /watch And then every time you make changes over here, when it detects a change in the YAML file, it'll just keep deploying and syncing your resources in the AWS cloud. Right. So we'll wait for this to get deployed. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'll just show you some other things that you can do in this case. Like any a visual tool, right? Any architecture kind of a tool, you have the option where at the moment you actually drag in a lot of other components inside, you can arrange these things together. So it's a very nice linear way to actually bring this out. You can also do things like grouping. And we'll see that in another example where you can actually create... let me see if I can... no, I'll cancel this. And I'll ungroup this. I'll select these two and I'm going to say, okay, hey, you know what? I'm going to have maybe some other components also inside. But in this case, I just want to group this as a simple, like a file detail, right? So I'll just say, okay, this is my file upload group in my case. And it's a great way to actually just visually see all this together. What this does under the hood is it creates a metadata section within your YAML file. And it then says, okay, because it's a type for composer groups, it will then create that file upload group and then says, okay, this is the different members, right? So it's a nice way to visually bring everything together in this case.
And
all right, cool. So
we can just see also as well, you mentioned earlier that even though we're using AWS SAM, it is CloudFormation that is actually being deployed. And what you could see in the output there was basically output from CloudFormation, that it has now created a stack and it has then created the resources and then finalized that stack eventually.
Yep. So if I just go quickly and show you in CloudFormation, because what SAM CLI does is behind the scenes, it'll take that SAM template and then create a CloudFormation template and then deploy that directly, right? So let's see if this works again. There you go. So that's my stack that I've just created right now. And this is the stack with all the resources in this case. So it's still under the hood will always use CloudFormation. If you use also CDK, it does the same. All right, cool. So I have this ready, and I have now my S3 bucket and my function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test this out. So for starters, I just need to get my S3 bucket in this case. Let me just do that quickly. And don't worry too much about all the other buckets that I have in this in my account. This is basically what I wanted to get. And what I'm going to do is I am going to copy a file which I have already in my system, and I'm going to upload this in the S3 bucket. And before that, what I just want to do quickly is I also want to create. Yeah, okay, this is fine. I think I can just use this. I'll move another one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a file, and then once I upload the file, I'm going to have a look at the logs to see what exactly is triggered behind the scenes. In this case, so I have my file in this name over here. Let's see. And because this is loading, I'm just going to upload a file, which is awesome. And because I have my logs, I have to actually tail my logs behind the scenes. So I will just
and what's meant to happen now is that the AWS Lambda function should be triggered by the file upload into the S3 bucket.
Yep. So what would have happened behind the scenes is everything was set up the way it was supposed to. Anytime you upload a file, an event notification is being sent. So for any operation that is being done on the file, an event notification is being sent down to your Lambda function. So if you noticed over here, we had a trigger mentioned in this case, right? So there's an event which is being triggered by a bucket of that S3 bucket of type S3. And this is basically the log file from the Lambda function, right? Which we're pulling down using something like SAM from SAM logs, right? From the command line. Now, in my case, what it's done is it has registered the bucket name. It has also registered the file name, which was samplefile.pdf. And then if I go back over here, and if I just quickly go to the console and just check this, I have my file inside already. Now, this is pretty cool in a way where, I can look at the file and I can immediately do this. And without doing any changes to the code, all I did was I just dragged some of those components in. And then afterwards, I connected them together. And even the index.js is just a simple console.log. So whatever is the event that is triggering the Lambda function, that gets logged into CloudWatch for Lambda. And then, we are able to see that directly. I guess it's a great way to get started with just testing out any serverless resources. You just provision all of them, connect them together in this case, and connect them all together, and then you can immediately just start looking at how you can get these things together working and get some functionality, some basic functionality running. Beyond this, there are other resources.
The next step would be to then edit that AWS Lambda function and do something with the actual event. So perhaps if it's an image uploader, that you then do some sort of resizing or whatever it could be with that event or that file that is being uploaded, and the event that is then triggering the Lambda function.
Exactly. And what usually happens at this point is, like, for example, one of the scenarios we have seen some customers actually talk about when Application Composer came in is they would come in and they would say, okay, hey, you know what, we are doing an architecture meeting right now. And instead of just doing it on a simple whiteboard, they would use Application Composer as a canvas to design the application as the discussion goes by. And by the time the meeting ends, they actually have like a skeleton template, right, of what needs to be built out. That template can then get saved, and then you can version control it, right, put it in Git anywhere, and then afterwards immediately share it with the team so that the team can then start building the code. So the thing is, you get a workable template immediately out of the box. And it's great that you could just then go in and maybe deploy this in a test environment or even in a development environment, and then slowly start iterating over that. And we'll do that towards the end, because I want to give folks a bit of a sneak peek later into the future of development, of how you can actually look at different tooling that actually helps you to become more productive in development. But before that, I just want to quickly wrap up some of the things in Application Composer. The idea that we have this question that some folks ask is, okay, this looks great because I just started a blank project and I started this by creating something from scratch. But what if I have like an existing SAM project, right? And what would happen if I actually select that and then deploy that? Or can I view it or can I not view it, right? And I'll show a simple example for this case. What I'll do is I have the code downloaded, but I'll just show what I'm actually downloading. Right. So this is an existing project that's there on serverlessland.com, and we'll share the link now or later on how you can get access to this. This is a site that links a lot of our serverless projects, our repos, and even patterns and architectures together. So all I've done is I've done a Git clone, and I've downloaded all of this, and this is the architecture under the hood that needs to be visualized. Now, because I have this already in place, I'm just gonna go in, and I'm gonna create another project. And if you notice, my file is already saved, so I don't have to worry too much about it. I can always go back to the other project, which I'll do in a bit. In this case, I'm just going to load an existing project, and I'm going to select a folder. And as part of selecting the folder, I will just go to the shopping cart. And this is going to give me a selection of all the files that are there right now. Now, if you notice, it doesn't give me the YAML file that I need. That's because the YAML file for this specific backend is actually sitting in another folder. So what I'll do is I'll just select that again. And in this case, now I can get the YAML files. I have the shopping cart service. I'll pick that one out because that has a couple of different services that give you an insight into other features that Application Composer provides. And this will then create the template. So now it's just loading all of this together. And what this has done is, this loads whatever is already available. So if I go to the template, actually in this case, this is a template that already is available on GitHub, so you can have a look at it, and it has all these different resources that are being provisioned, all these other parameters that are being configured, and stuff like that, right? Now in my case, what I've done is I can visually now see an existing project. I can see, okay, there is an API gateway that has multiple paths in it, and I can then see, okay, these are the different connections that are being made into things like lambda functions and different lambda functions in this case, right? Where it gives me all the different configurations from the SAM template directly. And it hasn't actually thrown an error per se. It's not saying, okay, this is not like in sync or out of sync, but it does show some things that are grayed out. And this is kind of like where I'll just mention about what are the different resources that are currently supported in Application Composer from a visual perspective. And if you notice on the left side, these are all, like the standard serverless resources that you can currently drag in and then configure. Now apart from this, you also have certain resources that are read only, which in this case it doesn't support currently. Like, to give an example, IAM roles, for example, are not supported in Application Composer, but you can view it, right? So what Application Composer does is it will then load the part and it'll load the section also, that actual subsection inside, which points to that specific resource. And then you can go into your code and then you can change it. So that way, what it does is at least visually you can see, okay, these are the different like resources that I'm provisioning, and you can then go beyond that. Other things that are also like, and there's another type of resource that is not supported, is hidden resources. And this is things like, okay, for example, let's say this is a REST API, right? But API gateway also supports HTTP API. So what it will do is it will show it as a separate box below, and you can maybe do some editing if Application Composer allows for it, right? So that's basically from a hidden perspective. So if I quickly just go to the documentation, and I can show you folks how it looks like. Here we go. Right. So we have three resources. Basically, you have the featured resources, which is what you saw on the left side in the column.
Zoom in a couple of steps?
Sure. There you go.
Yes.
Right. So you have the ones that we saw on the left side, which is the standard API gateway, Cognito user pool, Lambda function, for example, and S3 buckets. And then you have the hidden resources, right? So you can still use these to design and build, but they won't give you all the complete features, and you don't get them on the left side. So if your template actually uses any of these resources, like let's say, for example, a CloudFront function, right, an edge function, for example, it would then populate the canvas, and then if it supports some specific field, you may be able to edit it, or it will just be like a colored box. It'll just sit over there like these standard the resources that are currently available. And then you have the rest, right, which are just not supported right now in Application Composer. These can be visually seen, but then when you want to edit it, you have to do it manually, right? You go back to the editor and then you check it. So these are read-only resources in this case, and with an example also. That doesn't mean that we won't support any of these in the future. The idea is that we prioritize resources based on popularity, right, and usage from customers. And also we look at what would allow you to create a powerful combination when you're using Application Composer. And with SAM under the hood, you're basically going to be leveraging this for serverless applications mainly. So it makes sense to support at least the serverless resources upfront, right? After that, and then afterwards see how it would grow in the future. So that's at least a resource perspective. And if you notice now, I've uploaded a template that's built maybe a couple of months ago, updated a few months ago. And what I'm going to do is I noticed that, hey, you know what, this doesn't have currently Cognito configured, right? So let me just quickly pull up Cognito. In this case, I'll have a Cognito user pool which I can then connect as part of this. And over here you'll notice that anytime you make a change in the canvas, it actually gives you like a highlight of what's changed. And under the hood in the change, this actually then collapses when you expanded, it gives this change distinction like a diff, right? So we call this a change inspector in the panel, and this gives you this whole idea of, okay, this is how you can actually use these things. Now inside the visually I don't see it, but inside what it's done is it is actually using a cognito pool, right? It's actually referencing to a user pool on. But in my case, what I did is now I just change it by explicitly bringing a user pool inside. But my point is that this helps you to now slowly start making changes around an existing architecture and visually seeing those changes so that you can then deploy it later, and share it back with the team if needed. In this case, so I could have a user pool, I could then have a user pool client, and then maybe have a Lambda function that gets triggered, which then would trigger the user pool client to fetch certain user details in this case. Then from a grouping perspective, like I'd shown earlier, let's say, for example, if I have certain Lambda functions, like anything to do with the cart, I want to like group them all together. I could just group them like this. That gives me one group. And if I arrange them, I mean, this arrangement, I think personally for me, I think it looks fine. But then if I move ahead and then I try to arrange this directly, it would then move some of these functions around and some of the nodes around in this case. So Application Composer, I guess, is a great way to also visualize your existing projects. If anything, you would want to at least use it as a way to get conversations started within the teams and have a more visual approach to the design in this case. So yeah, I think this kind of like at a high level gives you an idea of what Application Composer does. You also can look at the resources which are in your canvas on the left side with list, and then the list tab, and then of course the resources which you can drag in this case. So
the way I found myself using it so far a bit is similar to how you use the designer in AWS Step Functions, the visual designer. So as a way to create that skeleton of your, in that case, workflow, but in this case, your entire serverless application, and then move over to the IDE to continue working on it. Having that visual representation of it sometimes helps in building out the skeleton of the application.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that high level, like a 20,000 feet view, right, of what you're building, kind of helps easier also from a planning perspective. Because let's say you're a wider team and you want to like push this around. Like for example, let's say that you're following a microservices architecture. You're having multiple lambdas in this case, and you kind of like see that okay, different parts of this functionality is owned by different teams for some reason. The teams get together, they plan this out, they kind of like debate, and then afterwards figure out okay, what works, what doesn't work, and then everyone goes back and then starts working on a single template that becomes a source of truth. With step functions, it's awesome because you get that whole business flow orchestrated at least at a high level with the skeleton. In this case, you can say all the other serverless resources which work towards that orchestration can also then be brought in. And from an infrastructure perspective at least, so that how all of these things are interconnected in this case.
Comment from Mookie Monkey: this is the future of devs.
Yeah, nice. It definitely is. And in fact, I think it's a good segue also into something I just wanted to show. I wasn't sure how much time I would have remaining in terms of showing a bit of a peek into the future, but seeing that we still have another 20 minutes, I think I'm just gonna go for it. Yeah, this is awesome in this case that you have an existing project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my project, and Gunnar kind of like indirectly already gave me a requirement, right? He actually mentioned about, okay, hey, when you upload a file, you can actually then take that file entries and then save that into a table. So you know what, let's just do that live, and we'll see how it goes. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to leverage another service behind the scenes to write the code for me. Hint, hint. So let's just quickly do that. So I'll go to live in this case, and I'll just view the files. I have the template.yaml. It's going to then just open this up, save the changes. I'm back to my simple bucket with Lambda function in this case, right? Now, what I want to do is I want to create a function, which, as part of this function, I want to now add an additional functionality that allows me to write an entry into the table every time a file gets uploaded, right? So I have a DynamoDB table in this case. I'll just bring it up over here, And I'm just gonna say, okay, fine, this DynamoDB table is what you need to interface to from this Lambda function. I just connect these two together. And if you notice from the change inspector perspective, what it's done is it has given me this option where, okay, there's a new environment variable now that's been added to my Lambda function, and also a DynamoDB CRUD policy, right, that allows the Lambda function to do certain operations, CRUD operations on the DynamoDB table, right? And it also references the table, which basically means I can now access this table name directly in my Lambda function. Cool. From a details perspective, I'm just going to keep it super simple. So for folks who don't know about DynamoDB, this is our homegrown NoSQL database offering, and is known as a tier 0 service. Basically, it powers a lot of our other services that you use day to day in AWS, and it's globally scalable and a lot of other things under the hood, different options that are available. So DynamoDB is like one of the NoSQL offerings that we have. And in my case, all I just want to do is, use it as a simple table, just for a simple data entry. Cool. So I have this, I have my table ready. If I go back over here, you'll see that my template.yaml has the required changes. I have my DynamoDB table and everything else, right? Okay, cool. So this is where the fun begins, because what I'm going to do now is I am going to first see if I can call in a friend of mine to actually build the code for me. So let me just check AWS. So I have the AWS toolkit already configured in my IDE. And hello, we have a new friend over here. So we have a service that we launched some time ago called Code Whisperer, which is still under preview. And what Code Whisperer does is this provides you suggestions in the code, right? And me being like a developer, I've already visually created everything, right? I just want to, like ask somebody else to write the code for me. So I'll just get Code Whisperer to write the code in this case. And the way you do that is you can sign up for Code Whisperer for free right now. It uses the AWS Builder ID if you need that, and it provides you easy steps to actually go in and configure. We'll share the link later if you want to just sign up and use this in the code. Right. So I have my simple console.log available over here. In the meantime, I'll just quickly sync my stack because I need everything else ready with the table so that I can just then focus on my index.js file. And while the template is, while Sam is syncing my infrastructure, I'm going to provide some comments in the code, which will then allow Code Whisperer to suggest certain, certain functionality, right? So first of all, what I want to do is there's an event that is being generated from S3, which is then triggering this Lambda function. So what I want to do is I want to retrieve the S3 file name, the bucket name, and the event name, because every event has a type, right? So it's basically a name from my event request. And I'm going to hand it over to Code Whisperer. So if you notice down over here, it's actually spinning, and it's now going to provide some certain, like suggestions. And it provides me actually 2 suggestions, which I can go through, like in this case. And this is pretty straightforward. So what I'm doing is this has given me a suggestion which says, okay, fine, you can use S3 file name and a bucket name and an event name. I just go with this. I click on tab. I have all of this ready. And I don't need anything else, to be honest, because I could just probably use these 3 and then focus on something else. So I just get rid of this. So I have all of these 3 available. What I'm going to do next is I'm just going to print these out so that like any, like developer, you want to make sure whatever you're getting is, right. So let me just do that. And guess what? Code Whisperer is actually saying, let me lend you an extra hand for this, and it's already given me some of the other console log entries, right? So I'm just gonna do that again once more. Let's see. I'll do this. So now I have all the 3 console log entries. And bam. Okay. So now I have my files, and what this does is this is from the event object that you saw in the log file over here. If I just quickly go to item, this is the event payload, right, that is coming into the Lambda function from S3, and now it's now parsing through that event payload, and it's picking out all these things like the file name, the object name, and the event name. Now what I want to do is I want to first thing I want to create a file entry, but I want to do that only for a file that is being added into the system, right? I don't want to do that for everything. So in this case, what I'll do is I will, let me see if I can check for something. There are a couple of events that come in as part of an S3 bucket event notification. So if you notice in this case, there is an event that is called object created dot put or colon put, right? And this is for every operation that you do. In my case, all I want to do is I want to just say, okay, fine, check event is object created put, because I'm also a bit lazy for doing an object created put file in this case. And it provides me some suggestions. I'll just go with this. You know what? It's pretty straightforward. And once I have this ready, I have the object created put check done. I want to do two things right now with DynamoDB as a NoSQL database. It does not generate automatic IDs, right, as part of a record like you get in RDBMS. So what I want to do is I just want to create a unique ID for the file, and it'll just create a file. In this case, it just uses math.random, right? Pretty standard stuff in this. And once this is done, what I want to do is I want to retrieve the DynamoDB table name from the environment variables. And now I'm able to get the environment table name in this case, right, directly from from the Lambda functions environment variable, right? So this is cool. So now I have all of this ready. Next up, the only next thing I need to do is I want to insert the ID, the file name, the bucket name, and maybe even a timestamp into the DynamoDB table, right? And what this is going to do is it's going to start now creating a payload for me, which I can start using. So I have the table name, I have the item, the ID, the file name, bucket name, and the new timestamp that is now being created as part of this, right? And next, it's going to now create a client connection to DynamoDB. And then it's going to do a put with a promise in this case. And because I successfully, then I'm able to do this, it is able to create that, and it will do a return as a final step and a function check in this case, right? So it has generated all of this. One of the things I need to do is I also need to just get, because this is actually using an AWS library, AWS SDK. So I'm just going to add that on top. And one of the things to note is that Code Whisperer is non-deterministic. So because I get a certain set of suggestions now, it doesn't give the same exact suggestions always. So when I did this a couple of hours ago, I also got this line, which was allowed me to require AWS SDK, but in this case, it did not provide it to me. But it's fine, right? It's not an issue. Cool. So from a code perspective, I think I'm all right with this. All it's doing is that it's loading all of this together. What do you say, Gunnar? You think it looks all right?
I think it does. Yeah.
Okay. And so let's see. I mean, so this is cool, at least from a code perspective, but let's run this, directly into, upload this into SAM and see how it goes from there, right? And because now I have a DynamoDB table also, we'll be able to see how it goes from there. So let this deploy. I'll just quickly go and check if I'm able to see my DynamoDB table. It's there over here, and I will go in and just have a look at the table items. Currently, it's empty, which is good. And once this uploads the Lambda function as a zip file, the moment of truth, we're going to test it out, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Yeah. Groovebox VJ calls it nice magic. So we'll see if it is magic. I think this is... Yeah, I think this is super cool. And even though this is a quite simple example of how you can use it, just learning how to use those prompts and how to actually get the suggestions, it is so helpful for developers to be able to basically do certain things in a lot faster manner.
Yep, exactly. And I think one of the things is that, let me see if I can... would delete also quickly. One of the things that we realize is that there is a lot of if you notice from the traditional point of view, and for folks who are as old as like me or Gunnar over here, in the old days, what we would do is we would write the algorithmic steps right down somewhere on paper or somewhere else, and then you would look through those notes, and then you would start like coding stuff. All you're done is you're circumventing all of that. You're saying, okay, let me write my notes or my to-do comments over here, and then let something like Code Whisperer step in and say, okay, I think I know what you can write for this, and fill out most of the code, right? So you actually get something working. Of course, you'll have to go through the suggestions also yourself, at least, but I think it's still a great way, like you said, Gunnar, for let's see if this deletes. Oh, okay.
It's about productivity, be able to use time
Exactly.
wisely.
It's about productivity. Okay, let me just quickly go here and just delete the file. And do the customary permanently delete. I'm sure everyone is excited to see what happens with the code over here. So I have Samsync over here. I'm going to now upload my file again. And in this case, I have my stack over here with the logs. So, all right, cool. So I've uploaded the file, and still says that it cannot find the module for AWS SDK. And I think the reason is because, yes, it's still Node.js 16.x because I did not save it. Okay, let me just do this again. So what has happened in a recent release is that with Node.js runtime 18.x, there is an update to the latest AWS SDK, which is V3, and AWS SDK V3 handles exports in a different way. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just moving this back to 16.x, and I'm going to redeploy that. If you notice over here, it's also changed it, which is kind of cool. And I'll just go back to DynamoDB, just make sure nothing has got created over here, which is good. I will go to my S3 bucket, and I will delete this also. Okay, cool.
All right.
Yep, last 8 minutes. This should work.
Oh yeah, plenty of time. So all right, so you're deploying the new version now, where you're basically switching to Node.js 16 instead.
Yep. And for folks who just saw all of this, right, this is kind of like the development flow that you have with serverless, right? You're changing the code and then you can deploy it. You can also locally test using SAM, right? For any serverless function, most of the serverless resources that you provision can be tested using SAM local, but you need Docker to be installed on your laptop. And the way it does is that it then generates those events that are required so that then you can test them out directly. This is basically the error that has come right over here before this. Cool. So we have this. I have my S3 bucket cleared out. I'm just going to upload another file, and we'll see this go. And in this case, we'll wait for the log to come up. Yep. And the logs here, it also says that we have successfully inserted the item into DynamoDB table. If you notice, it has also printed out things like the sample file.pdf, a file, the bucket name, and also the event type, right? Object created.put. So let's go into your
That's spoilers.
Yeah. And here you go. And this is basically where you have the DynamoDB table entry. It has created the table with a unique ID in this case, right? So pretty awesome, I would say. And it's a great peek into how we see development workflows actually changing and moving to make developers into more productive, right? To make developers more productive and contribute to actually solving problems instead of focusing on the nitty-gritty of every kind of simple code, right? And Code Whisperer, I think, is a great way to like for me, for example, I'm someone who will always go back to the documentation, always search for, okay, how do I do X and how do I do Y when I write a Lambda function? And this kind of like just enables me to be so much productive based on that. So I think that's in a nutshell of how you can look at, a combination of Application Composer plus Code Whisperer. The only code I added extra to this was this one, right? Outside into whatever was given. So I mean, that's productivity right there. You're delivering business value immediately as part of the application there. So
exactly. No, very cool. And so there is a question or comment from Kurt Farr in the chat. References to using this to visualize existing workloads. So, and I'm not sure if it will not provide or create a new SAM template for you. What Faz was talking about is that you can use your existing serverless workloads where you have a template and basically open them in Application Composer to visualize it. So Application Composer will not, well, you can't take an existing workload that is deployed in another way and then open it. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Faz. But
yeah, you're right, Gunnar. So it works for SAM templates right now. So if you have a serverless project that was deployed using SAM, then great. You can just load that template directly in and you can visually see it. But if it's used anything by something else, like maybe like the third-party serverless framework, or maybe if you're using some other things, or even the AWS SDK, you wouldn't be able to visualize it in this case over here. So yeah, SAM templates are a requirement, at least for now. But you could always look at if you're not using something like SAM CLI and you're just like manually creating your serverless resources, I would suggest it's a great way to get started in trying to bring automation to your infrastructure, trying to bring infrastructure as code as a norm in your teams. So you could sit as a team, go through what are the different resources, recreate that environment with serverless using Application Composer, and then just take in your code and plug it in as part of that. Like basically what I did, right? In my case, I just it created the source folders for me, and all I did was just populated it with whichever things I needed as part of the code. So yeah.
And I think that's great because this allows for, well, some of us are visual builders and some are well, basically code builders, and this allows to bridge that gap, I'd say. So people
Absolutely.
that are different can work together on projects, and you get exactly what you need. And it's also so easy to visualize it to others. Not everyone is a developer either on the team. It could be when you're talking with project managers or product managers and so on as well, to be able to visualize what you're actually building.
Exactly. And the best part in this is that because this is generating code under the hood and no other special file, you version control this and you can go back in time, right? You can actually look at previous architecture decisions, why actually something happened. There is this practice, certain architecture teams we have seen some customers talk about, called architecture decision records, right? ADRs as they call them. It's like small snippets where you say why you actually made an architecture. I believe this is really useful in those kind of cases where you can go back in time, load that template inside, and then see, okay, why did we do X, Y, Z? And visually, when you see it, it's like you kind of like understand a lot of the context already, right? When you see all these things together with the components and the name. So yeah, absolutely, I think it really helps for visually seeing what you're building, and it's a great way to just get all of that out, have it as a conversation starter, and discuss how you can build better products.
Yeah. All right. And with that, we are almost at the top of the hour. So it is time to say thank you and goodbye for this time. So thanks a lot, Faz, for joining again. Well, I think we might have you back one more time. You did good this time, Faz. So happy to have you join again in the future. I posted a link to a survey. Please help us fill out that survey and let us know what you thought about the episode. And also, if you have any suggestions for future topics, please post them as well. All right, Faz, then thank you very much. And to everyone watching, thanks a lot. And thanks for all the comments and questions in the chat as well. And we will, of course, be back again next week with another episode of AWS Nordics Office Hours.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gunnar. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.